Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for the Padney Health and Research Foundation Grand Round. I don't feel like a hero, overcoming imposter syndrome, guilt, and perfectionism in the time of COVID-19. This is a program that we are bringing you in response to all the hard work that you've been doing. Now that you've had a few minutes to breathe, at least temporarily, we wanted to make sure you had some supports and coping strategies and things to help you get through this time and moving forward. So thank you for joining us. The first thing I would like to do is read a disclosure. This is for any of you who have applied for CMEs. This class activity sign-in code is 04FACE. It will expire tomorrow at noon. If you can see the screen, it's text code to 828, 295-1144, or you can visit eeds.com. And we will be sending this slide out to you at the end of today so that you have it. And just a disclosure, Gayle Gizelle, MD, has no relevant financial relationships to report in the last 12 months with the commercial interest. This activity is not commercially supported. So with that, I'm going to introduce our fantastic speaker today. Dr. Gayle Gizelle is a physician and a part-time Harvard Medical School assistant professor and a master certified coach for physicians. She's coached over 500 physicians and physician leaders and is a former internist and hospice physician. Dr. Gizelle understands the challenges everyone in healthcare is facing. She is also a certified mindfulness meditation teacher. Her articles have appeared in such diverse venues as the New England Journal of Medicine and the Oprah magazine. So quite a variety there. And her book, Everyday Resilience, is coming out next month if you've enjoyed this program and need some more tips from her. So I will let you take it away, Dr. Gayle.
Thank you, Tuhina. When Jeff left his emergency room shift at a New York City hospital one night in April, he did not feel like a hero. He'd intubated 3 COVID patients during that shift, a 92-year-old man, a 65-year-old woman, and a 45-year-old mother of 2 teenagers. 2 of these patients had been transferred up to the ICU. The mother of the 2 teens had actually died in the emergency room. By the end of his shift, Jeff was overwhelmed by the tragedy of what he was seeing, not just today, but in all the shifts in recent times. He was feeling exhausted. And as he left the hospital driving home, he was so fatigued that he wasn't even sure how he would make it from his driveway into his home. So fatigued that he didn't think he'd have the energy to be up with his 2 young kids. So fatigued that he wasn't sure he'd be able to go back for his next shift. His wife had texted him asking him to pick up some groceries. And in the grocery store, he'd run into a neighbor who, upon seeing him in his scrubs, became very excited, ran up to the checkout counter and began shouting, "He's one of our heroes. Everyone, look at him." And Jeff thought to himself, I'm not a hero. Heroes save lives. And I was unable to save that mom of the 2 teenagers. Heroes are selfless. They don't think about themselves. And yet throughout my shift, I found myself thinking, am I going to become infected? Am I going to infect my wife and my kids and others? Heroes always care about others, always put others ahead of themselves. But I'm not sure I really care anymore. I've become so hardened to everything that I'm seeing. Now, whether you are a physician, a PA, an NP, a therapist, whatever your role is in healthcare, what I want to say to you and to Jeff is three things. Three things. One, you don't have to be perfect to be a hero. Two, while you may find yourself being very hard on yourself, it's not the road to resilience and well-being. And three, your beliefs about yourself are not always accurate, particularly beliefs that you may have about being an imposter. Now, in addition to these three things, I want to just go over the official objectives for the session. The first, questioning whether you do have to be perfect to be a hero. The second, utilizing self-compassion as a strategy to build well-being and resilience to all of the demands. And three, having tools for questioning imposter beliefs. So what we'll do over our time together is I'll present some real-life vignettes like Jeff with the name change to protect confidentiality. We'll look at a video clip. We'll have some small group discussions in breakout rooms. There'll be some self-reflection questions that I'll pose to you, so please have a pen and paper handy. And hopefully at the end of our time, we'll leave some opportunity for your questions and answers. My goal today is that in addition to those 3 points, that you can leave this session feeling a sense of goodness and accomplishment for all that you are able to do, and perhaps let go of any thoughts about being an imposter or having to be perfect that may in some ways be getting in your way. Point number 1, you don't have to be perfect to be a hero. You see, most heroes are not perfect. And in fact, most heroes do not feel like they are a hero, that other people are considering them or labeling them. I want to take for an example here, Marine Sergeant Dakota Meyer, who fought in the Afghanistan war, and as you can see here, was awarded a Medal of Honor. Marine Sergeant Dakota Meyer defied orders that had told him to stay put during a big enemy fight. He defied orders and repetitively ran into the area of crossfire, saving 12 fellow soldiers and providing cover for 24 further so that they could get out to safety. He's somebody that we could all consider a hero. And yet, what I want to share with you now is a very brief video clip of him on 60 Minutes. And you'll be able to see for yourself how he viewed himself.
You were disobeying orders.
Yeah, I was.
The first time you went forward, you disobeyed orders. And then the last time, when you got the bodies, you disobeyed another order.
You know, in those type of circumstances, you just do what you think's right.
Do you realize that what you did was extraordinary?
No, I don't. It would have been extraordinary if I'd have brought him out alive. That would have been extraordinary.
Yeah. That would have been impossible.
Nothing's impossible. I still didn't get him out alive. You know, I had the mission I went in there to do was get my guys out alive. I didn't bring them out alive. So when you don't achieve a mission, you fail.
You got to be the only person in America that's going to see it that way.
Well, that's how I see it.
You ready to be a hero?
I'm not a hero. I'm the furthest thing from a hero. I pour concrete. I'm a construction guy. I'm not a hero.
And a lot of people are going to make you a hero.
Well, I mean, if they see it that way, you know, that's fine. But that's, like I said, I'm the furthest thing from a hero. A hero are the men and women still serving. Those are the heroes.
So I hope all of you could see and hear that adequately. It's quite poignant, isn't it? And I want to think about the similarities between what we're seeing here with Marine Sergeant Dakota Meyer and for all of you in the Pagney healthcare system. Here, Dakota Meyer saved multiple lives. And yet what we see in that interview is that his focus was not on the lives that he saved. His focus was on what he was not, very tragically, able to accomplish. And when I think about all of you in the trenches in New York City, doing so much to combat this pandemic, working with so many individual patients and trying everything that you possibly can during this difficult time, I think there are some parallels here. Because for many of you, like Jeff, you may be focused more on what you're not able to do than what you are doing. And I think it's fair to say that many of us learned in our training something like this, that being good enough was not good enough. In fact, that we somehow had to be perfect. We learned that we had to be the strong ones. We had to be the ones who have the answer, whatever our discipline is, whatever our field is. And yet, what do we do in a situation like this where there simply are not answers? And is it possible that we can focus on doing our best and being good enough if we can't meet that standard of perfection? So I want to just ask you this question, and this will pop up as a poll on your screen. Excuse me, these two questions. First, do you consider Dakota Meyer a hero? And second, do you consider yourself a hero during this time? So please answer yes or no as you see this pop up on your screen. And Tahina, I'm just going to ask you to read the results if you would.
If you close the poll after a minute, I will be able to do that.
Thank you.
So the results are that 100% of our audience thinks Dakota Meyer is a hero. And they consider themselves hero only 5% of the time. 90% of the time, they would say they're not a hero.
Thank you, everyone, for participating in that. And what a striking juxtaposition that is, 100% seeing this young man as a hero. And only 5% of you seeing yourselves as heroes. So what we're going to do now is I'd like you to have the opportunity to talk about this in a small group. We really can't do that in the large Zoom platform. So you're going to break into breakout rooms. You'll be in the breakout room for 7 minutes, and I'd like you in that room to discuss these two questions. Do you feel comfortable being called a hero? I think we're getting a sense of what the answer to that might be. And then the second question, do you believe that you have to be perfect to be a hero? You'll be in the breakout room for about 7 minutes. You'll see it pop up on the screen, and if you could just click yes, join a breakout room, you'll enter one. And if you'd be kind enough to assign one person in your breakout room to kind of be the spokesperson, when we come out of the breakout rooms, hopefully we'll have the time for at least a few of you to briefly, perhaps for about 15 or 30 seconds, share with us what the learning was in your breakout room. So please just go ahead and mute yourself and jump in if you would.
Our breakout room got started late because we only realized none of us had microphones. So it was all done by chat, and then I just called in now. So the only thing really said was not sure why we have to be called anything specific, just doctor or whatever it is you were during the epidemic.
Thank you for sharing that. Someone else, please.
Yeah, I guess that was our group who had said that. I mean, if you're just doing your job, I don't really feel like I have a need for people to call me hero. That's not really what anybody is asking for.
Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else that we can hear from?
From my group in particular, it was the same sentiment that I think it's been passed along, which is if we've been doing this prior to the pandemic happening, and all your lives, right? We've been saving lives. Why is it now that that we are being called a hero at this particular moment when we have been saving lives all of our careers? So it's the labeling part, which for society, I believe they see it that way. They see us, they see the physicians and they see everybody as heroes. I don't know, in this time of need, in this time.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Hi, no one was really in my group. It was just me, but I think the prior video that you showed, the man who did all of that, he did something that seemed to be extraordinary. And I have to agree with the sentiment of my colleagues that we're really just doing our job and we kind of try to push the needle one way or another. But yeah, for a given patient, we can't necessarily, we do the best we can, but that's what we've always done, I suppose.
Thank you. Yeah, so really difficult, isn't it? All of you saying, we're just doing our jobs. And frankly, it's what we've always done. And here, the pandemic comes at a time when we were experiencing record high rates of burnout throughout healthcare, you know, in almost every field in the healthcare endeavor. And so I hear this from some of you, and I've heard it from other physicians in New York City and elsewhere in North America. Why didn't people see our worth before? Where were the citizenry in terms of all the hard work that we've done for such a long time? And then now this very appropriate sense, I'm just doing my job. And we can see too that Dakota Meyer echoed some of that same sentiment. I'm just doing my job. And in fact, look at me now, I'm a construction worker. So I don't even deserve to be called a hero. So it's a complicated thing, but what I want to say as a take home before we move on to the next point in the talk is that we're all very good at focusing on what we're not able to do as opposed to what we are. And I hope that just in seeing the juxtaposition of Marine Sergeant Dakota Meyer, perhaps you can even think a little bit about that. How can I feel good about what I am able to do, even if I can't do it perfectly, which of course, during this pandemic, none of us can. So I want to switch the frame here to the issue of times when we can be very hard on ourselves. And is it being hard on ourselves or being kind to ourselves that can bring out a sense of resilience to whatever stresses and problems we face? So before we talk about self-compassion, I want to just talk briefly about compassion and what it is. And compassion is when we see suffering, difficulty, pain, and we're moved to alleviate it. Now, for many of us in healthcare, we can be our most harsh critic. I'm imagining that most of you are very compassionate with your patients, perhaps with your loved ones as well. Although even as I'm saying this, some of you may find yourselves thinking, well, I'm actually not that compassionate because I'm really drained and I'm really exhausted here. And if that's the case, I think that really brings home the point of how critical we can be with ourselves. We say things to ourselves that we wouldn't say to anyone else, let alone someone who we care about. And in healthcare in particular, we're in the business of taking care of others. And if our hearts are open to others and we're bringing care and compassion to others, and yet we don't include ourselves, it's almost as if we're saying they're worthy of compassion and I'm not. And we're creating a sense of separation that, in fact, I think can leave us more isolated, can really drain our well of resilience and make it difficult for us not to go into burnout and exhaustion. For myself and for the people in healthcare, physicians, physician leaders, other healthcare leaders that I coach, what I've seen over and over is that the pattern of being critical of ourselves, in fact, can leave us very drained. And if we're able to build the muscle of self-kindness, it actually can lead not only to greater well-being and a sense of satisfaction and meaning in our jobs, but it can also increase our level of productivity. I want to just share an example, someone I'll call Marcia, who came to me for coaching because she was really struggling to keep up with her charting, something that I'm sure none of you struggle with. Marcia was perpetually behind in her charting, the bottom of her department, in all those wonderful reports that we get about how we're ranked to our peers. Marcia had had the IT person work with her. They developed smart sets and templates and drop-down menus. Someone from Epic had shadowed her, sadly, to no avail. So when we got started in coaching, one of the things I asked Marcia to do was to walk me through what her experience was when she would sit down to chart so that we could see if there was something there that we needed to work with. Marcia told me about how she would sit down to chart, typically at the end of another long and exhausting day. And she would sit there, and what would go through her mind was, I'm not very efficient. I don't know how I'm going to get all these charts done today. I'm actually not as smart as my peers. I'm not really as good at all this as they are. And I'm not keeping up in my field. And during this pandemic, I mean, I'm not in the emergency room. I'm not in the ICU. So what am I really contributing? And I think you can hear in these self-critical messages that Marcia was experiencing that it's no surprise that she then had difficulty going on and getting the charting done. Now, many of us believe that we do have to focus on our deficits and our weaknesses if we're going to improve. I teach the PGY2 internal medicine residents at my hospital here in Boston. And they uniformly say, you know, if I don't beat myself up, how am I ever going to learn more? How am I ever going to improve? But it raises the question, do we motivate ourselves and others by beating ourselves up, by being hard on ourselves? Or do we motivate ourselves by seeing our strengths and looking at ourselves more kindly? And when you think back on your own professional training, I'm wondering what you learned. Did you learn to focus on your strengths or on your weaknesses? Did you have attendings and mentors who said, you know, you're doing a great job. I can see how hard you're trying. I can see how committed you are to taking excellent care of patients. Or did you have something different than that? And I won't put it up as a poll question, but I think it's fair to say that many of us in our professional training experience something a bit different than that. I'm wondering if any of you in the audience have kids or grandkids. And if you could
Yes.
please bring to mind a young person, either someone in your family or a niece or nephew, or even a kid that you can imagine that you've seen somewhere else. And as you bring them to mind for a moment, let's imagine that they're working on a math problem and they're struggling. And so you go over to help them. What do? Well, you sit down with them and you say to them, you're not doing very well at this, are you? You're really not very good at this math. I think your brother or your sister's a lot better at this than you are. And I gotta say, I don't think you really even have a future in doing this math. Now you can imagine how deflating that would be to this young person, right? They just kind of crawl in within themselves and they would never do math again and certainly not flourish in math. And yet we can often think to ourselves, well, I'm an adult, I'm different. I need to motivate myself by being hard on myself. So let's try a little reflection exercise right now. If you could pull up that paper and pen or type on your computer screen, and I'd like you to think for a moment about this week at work. It's Monday, you have a whole work week ahead of you. And I just want you to imagine the difficulties that you know you'll be facing in your workplace, the challenging patients you'll see, the coworkers and supervisors that you have, and just bring to mind what your work week entails. And I'd like you to write down now 3 things that you may be saying to yourself about how you're not doing well at work. So I apologize for asking that, but again, if you could just write down 3 things, and you don't have to share them with us, 3 things that you have said to yourself you're just not doing very well at, whatever that may be. So take a moment to write that down. And as you're writing, just briefly check in with yourself, physically and mentally. And in a sense, kind of take your inner temperature. Notice if your body is feeling good, relaxed, comfortable, or if your body is feeling tight, constrained, forehead furrowed, shoulders stressed and raised. And I'd like you now to rate your level of motivation to go forward with what's on your plate for the rest of the week. So on a 0 to 10 scale, 0 is no motivation at all, and 10 is, yeah, I'm ready for it. Just take note right now of what your number is on that 0 to 10 scale. And now I'd like you to write down 3 things that you are doing well at work. Anything, small or large, that you are doing well, that you're accomplishing. 3 things. I'm taking good care of the patients that I'll be seeing. I'm working very hard to be a good member of my department. To really look at 3 things that you're doing well. And as you're writing these 3 things, again, if you can just check in with yourself, particularly physically, just notice if anything has shifted. Again, whether there are areas of tightness and tension, anxiety, or whether there's a more open, expansive, relaxed state. And take a moment again to rate your level of motivation on that 0 to 10 scale. 0, no motivation to proceed with the work tasks, and 10, I'm ready. So we're going to do another poll. And the question that I'm posing to you is, well, my level of motivation decreased, didn't change at all, increased by 1 point, or increased by more than 1 point. So if you could take a moment to share that with us. Everyone see the poll question? And Tahina, when we're ready, if you can unmute yourself and share that with us.
As soon as the poll closes, I should be able to get you that information. All right. So 12% of the respondents say they decreased in motivation by 12%. 35% said did not change. Increased by 1 was 47%, almost half, and increased by greater than 1 was 6%.
Wonderful, thank you. So we see a curve. Some of you experienced motivation by looking at the things you're not doing well. And then a large bunch of you had an increase when you looked at things you're doing well. And it's ironic, but the more we focus, for most of us, on what we're not doing well or what still needs to be done, the more draining and daunting our tasks can seem. The more we focus on what we are doing well and what we are accomplishing, oftentimes the more confidence and energy we have to accomplish more. And in light of that, I want to switch the frame to self-compassion. And Chris Germer and Kristen Neff are two of the major researchers in this area. Chris Germer says to us, a moment of self-compassion can change your entire day. A string of such moments can change the course of your life. So I'd like to just walk you through right now something that these two researchers call a self-compassion break. As you think about your work week and what lies ahead, if it's comfortable for you just to close your eyes and to put your right hand over the area of your heart as I say a few things. What you're going through during the pandemic is exceedingly difficult. So much hardship and so much suffering that you're seeing, and we have such limitations in our arsenal of how we can help patients. So this is very difficult. And many in healthcare are struggling in just the way that you're struggling to get everything done and to not dwell on things that are undone or not done as well as you would have liked. I want to just say a few things, and I'd like you to repeat these mentally to yourself after I say them. And I hope that some of these can resonate for you. May I be kind to myself during this time. May I let go of anything I've done imperfectly during the pandemic. May I give myself the compassion I need and deserve. May I intentionally take time to focus on what I am accomplishing. May I care for myself just as I would for a loved one. And when you're ready, opening your eyes. Many of us in healthcare find this kind of exercise very difficult. It's much more familiar to beat ourselves up and, in a sense, to bully ourselves. And yet, this is a muscle that we can all build. We can build this ability to develop the same kind of kindness that we have for others and for friends and loved ones, and direct it to ourselves. At the end of our time together, I'm going to send out some resources, and I'll include this self-compassion break. So in summary, what we've talked about here is the muscle of compassion and the muscle of self-compassion, and how most of us are very good at being hard on ourselves. And yet, if we can build this muscle of kindness, just as we said, we may find that we have more confidence and energy to meet the challenges that we face. So in our remaining time, I want to switch the frame again, and I want to talk about IS. Now, IS is the imposter syndrome. When I would give this type of talk, even a few years ago, and I would say IS, people would be like, now, what is that? But there's growing awareness in healthcare that many of us, if not all of us, walk around feeling like an imposter. It's a deep belief that we're not worthy, that we're not as good as other people are, that perhaps we know as little and it's something as minuscule as the tip of our pinkies when other people, our peers, know as much as, let's say, the borough of Manhattan. And it's the sense that it's only a matter of time until we're found out as a complete fraud, and then we'll be the laughing stock of our institution. Now, as you can see here, that your fear of being publicly exposed as a fraud is a stress-related disorder called the imposter syndrome. It's common amongst high-profile authority people in authority positions and in actual phonies like you. So we got to laugh a little bit in the middle of this pandemic.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
And in fact, many high-achieving people suffer from the imposter syndrome. Look at this, Shakespeare. Oh my goodness, this is absolute crap. And in addition, some other high-profile people feel like imposters. Michelle Obama. I work to overcome that question that I always ask myself, am I good enough? Am I good enough to have all of this in my life? Maya Angelou. I've written 11 books, but each time I think they're going to find out. I've run this game on everyone, and now they're going to find me out. Albert Einstein. The exaggerated esteem in which my life and work is held makes me very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler. So this is pervasive, and I just want to run through why is it? What happens that we feel like an imposter? This is something that I call the cycle of perceived inadequacy, where many of us focus on what we didn't do well. Oh, I didn't give a very good talk. I didn't make the right diagnosis. You know, I'm just not very smart. Then we compare ourselves with our peers. But just as we're hyper-focused on what we didn't do well, we're equally hyper-focused on what we think others did do well. Wow, what a great presentation she gave. Look at how smart she is. Look at how articulate. So we create this delta, this cognitive distortion between where we perceive we are and where we perceive our peers are. But you know what? We don't stop there. We keep going round and round and round and doing this. And I want to be clear, for every person that we're comparing ourselves to, they're actually engaged in the exact same cycle, comparing themselves to somebody else. We learn to focus on this inner view. It's what our minds do. And so we have all this evidence that we're looking at. Then we compare our insides to somebody else's outsides. And I think we've learned from social media that most of us are pretty good at projecting an outside that is not necessarily the truth of our inner experience. And it leaves us in this very, very painful cycle. Now, quick question, and we won't do a poll, but is this an objective or a subjective cycle? I'm going to go with subjective. And in healthcare, we're trained to be pretty darn objective, aren't we? And yet with this cycle, we running around, focusing on a narrow band of data, not the whole picture, and keep telling ourselves over and over that we're an imposter. This is a little difficult to see, but it's an infographic that I had made up that talks about how the imposter syndrome contributes not just to burnout in physicians, but to burnout in everyone in healthcare. Because the weight of this, as you could hear from Marcia, who I talked about earlier, this sense that she was an imposter, the burden of it is mighty. And the cost of it is exhaustion and rumination. So I hope that by touching on the imposter syndrome, you can think a little bit to yourself about the messages that you give yourself. Are you being objective or subjective? And how can you be a bit more objective in looking at the fullness of data? Tuhina said that in addition to my medical background and coaching, I'm also a certified mindfulness meditation teacher. And there's so much interest now in mindfulness and meditation. I've created a series that's specifically for those in healthcare. You get an audio for 14 days, once a day in your inbox. For less than 10 minutes, you learn about mindfulness, compassion, and you get practice in meditating. It's free. If this can be of help to you or any of your colleagues, all you have to do is text the letters DDOC for the Daily Dose of Calm 33777. And I hope this can be helpful to you. So, in summary, we've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about how most clinicians in New York City during this time do not feel like a hero. And I hope that you can give some thought to the idea that you don't have to be perfect to be a hero. We talked also about compassion and self-compassion, and that we can be more motivated when we're kind to ourselves, when we're not perpetually bullying ourselves and telling ourselves that we're not good enough. And third, we touched briefly on the imposter syndrome, this very subjective cycle of perceived inadequacy that we can engage in that does not reveal the truth. So I'm going to send out some resources to you, but I'll be available after this session. I'd really like to be a resource if I can be helpful to you around mindfulness, self-compassion, burnout, the topics that we've covered. I'm also happy to offer a free one-on-one 30-minute complimentary coaching session if that can be helpful to you. You can reach me here at my email or on my website. And just in closing, I want to thank all of you for your attention. This is difficult stuff, and I want to challenge each of you as you leave this session to think, how can I be more kind to myself this very week? How can I push myself to focus on what I am doing well as opposed to what I'm not? I think you may find out that it helps you be more resilient to all of the pressures and stresses of this time. So thank you for your attention. I think we have a few minutes for questions. Tuhina, if you want to open the chat room, I'm happy to answer these.
Yes, I've opened it up. Either you can unmute and ask your question, or feel free to go into your chat room and put in your question or your comments. We have about 2 minutes. Anybody?
It's a lot of material to take in, and I suspect that people will digest some of this in their own time. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions at that time as well.
We had one comment about adjusting to the change that COVID has caused, like it sounds like a permanent change and will cause for likely the next 12 months. That must be new to people and trying to adjust to a new norm.
So incredibly much to adjust to, isn't it? And it's not as if it's a stationary target. Things are changing. The focus is changing. Will we have more surges now that areas like New York City are opening up? What will this mean? How will we handle this? What will healthcare employment look like going forward? So again, I've shared my view that, again, that it can be really ironic that if we find ourselves focusing on what we're not doing well, it's very hard for us to be resilient to managing all of the change and uncertainty. And one key to resilience is that ability to bring compassion to ourselves and to have an intentional practice of looking at what we are accomplishing.
Wonderful. We did get a comment that great talk. Thanks, timely and something we don't tend to focus on. Thank you for that.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, we'll go to the next slide just so I can remind you if you're getting CME for this. Here is the slide with the code on it. I also want to let you know that Dr. Gayle Gizelle is our facilitator for our new physician support, peer support program that we have every Tuesday at noon, on Thursday at 7:30. We might be changing the times depending on when is most convenient. So please feel free to join us tomorrow at noon. This is for physicians only at this point, but we will be starting a different program for all other clinicians at PAGNI. So stay in tune for that. And the next slide, please. And I just wanted to update you that this program was brought to you from donations, the COVID Relief Fund. We think it's really important that we use a lot of this funding to help you emotionally and not just professionally, but personally, to make you as strong as you can be and thrive, not just survive. I'm happy to say that since we started the COVID-19 Relief Fund on April 10th, we've raised $268,000 so far. So thanks to all of you who have pushed that and have let your colleagues and contacts know about that. You've done a tremendous job raising money. And I thank you. Thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.